President Trump's actions and inactions in the wake of Charlottesville are provoking some uncomfortable conversations, mostly off the air, if we're being honest. In discussions among friends and family and debates on social media, people are questioning the president's fitness. But these conversations are happening in newsrooms and TV studios as well. Usually after the microphones are off or after the stories are filed, after the paper's been put to bed, people's concerns and fears and questions come out. Questions that often feel out of bounds, off limits, too hot for TV. Questions like these. Is the President of the United States a racist? Is he suffering from some kind of illness? Is he fit for office? And if he's unfit, then what? These are upsetting, polarizing questions. They're uncomfortable to ask. But we in the national news media can't pretend like our readers and viewers aren't already asking. They are asking. This is how deep the country's divide has really become. My impression is that since President Trump's inauguration, there's been a lot of tiptoeing going on. His actions have been described as unpresidential, as unhinged, and sometimes even crazy. Now, that word crazy can be interpreted several different ways. It gets said a lot more in private than it gets said on TV. For instance, this next soundbite was never meant to be heard on TV at all. Last month, Republican Senator Susan Collins was overheard on a hot mic saying that Trump's handling of spending was incredibly irresponsible. Democratic Senator Jack Reed responded by saying he thinks Trump is crazy.
He's crazy. I mean, I don't say that lightly and as a kind of, a goofy guy.
This week, Republican Senator Bob Corker questioned the president's stability. Watch.
The president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability nor some of the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful.
Now, some Democrats, not surprisingly, have gone a lot further. California Democrat Zoe Lofgren asked if Trump has early-stage dementia. She said she wants a mental exam conducted. Another California Dem, Jackie Speer, called for Trump's removal under the 25th Amendment. And Al Gore said Trump should resign. We're also hearing this in some liberal corners of the news media and the entertainment world. You saw late-night comics got very serious this week. Jimmy Kimmel made jokes about making Trump a powerless king, but he meant what he said about getting Trump out of office.
Desperate times call for desperate measures, and I'm asking you, the people who supported Donald Trump, to step in and help for the good of this country. Mike Pence is ready. He's boring. He's relatively sane. He looks like a neighbor you might borrow a lawnmower from. Let's get him in there before it's too late. Let's make America Great Britain again.
Now, if you've picked up your Sunday paper, you've seen that the papers are filled with cries for change. This is the Los Angeles Times, the liberal editorial board there saying, enough is enough. Trump is, quote, a danger to the Constitution, a threat to our democratic institutions. Now, all this brings me back to those questions that are tough to ask out loud on national television. Is the President of the United States suffering from some sort of illness? Is he racist? Is he fit to be commander-in-chief? And one more. Is it time for objective journalists, and I don't mean opinion folks, I mean down-the-middle journalists, to address these questions head-on? And if so, how in the world should they do that? And Douglas Brinkley, when we're talking about these issues, if reporters are trying to pursue some really disturbing questions about the president's fitness for office, aren't many conservatives and many Trump voters going to interpret that as just the press being the opposition trying to subvert their vote?
Well, there's no question, particularly the Trump Republicans are going to look at it that way, but Senator Corker is a real leader among Republicans, and it was very brave of him to step out and really talk about the fact that we have an incompetent president, and what does that mean for our country. There are things that can be done right now. I mean, on the medical front, look, we all know he is a neon billboard for, overt narcissism, malignant self-love. We've all known that. And now we're seeing that we're getting the ramifications as a nation of what having a sick man in the White House means. I think the Senate might need to move forward. He is. He's not mentally stable. And we need perhaps the Senate needs to do a censor coming up here. General Kelly is going to have to continue to try to stop him from taking to the mics and dividing our country like he did at Trump Tower. There's got to be some effort to control his tweets, but the government's going to have to run. The White House has to run almost around the president. And, you know, we saw Nixon with H.R. Haldeman. You know, he would tell Haldeman, go bomb Brookings Institute, Nixon, or go bomb Wounded Knee, and people just started disregarding what Nixon said. Henry Kissinger regularly didn't listen to his president. I think we're at that state now when the 5 generals of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have to go out and enter politics and say, we want nothing to do with what the president is saying. It is a crisis going on in the White House, and it's about Donald Trump's fitness for command.
Just into us here at CNN, another American CEO rebuking President Trump for his response to Charlottesville. Let me read for you now. This is the Walmart CEO, Doug McMillon's statement in full. Here you go. He writes, respect for the individual is one of our core beliefs at Walmart, and the role we play in communities around the country to build a more diverse and inclusive society is more critical than ever, as tragic events in Charlottesville over the weekend painfully reminded us. Our prayers are with the victims and their families. As we watched the events and the response from President Trump over the weekend, we too felt that he missed a critical opportunity to help bring our country together by unequivocally rejecting the appalling actions of white supremacists. His remarks today were a step in the right direction, and we need that clarity and consistency in the future. Our country is facing some very difficult issues that require our elected officials, business leaders, and community-based organizations to work together. Representing a company with the largest and one of the most diverse groups of associates in the U.S. and an even more diverse customer base of tens of millions of customers, we believe we should stay engaged to try to influence decisions in a positive way and help bring people together. I will continue to strongly advocate on behalf of our associates and customers and urge our elected officials to do their part to promote a more just, tolerant, and diverse society. Thank you for representing Walmart and our values today and every day. Again, this is from Doug McMillon, who's the CEO of Walmart, who's on the President's Economic Advisory Council. It is worth noting McMillon is this now makes 5 major executives coming out against the president's response just in the last 36 hours. More on this in just a moment. But first, as demonstrators plan a second night of protest outside of Trump Tower, the Justice Department appears to be escalating its effort to quiet and maybe even punish anti-Trump activities. CNN is learning that justice officials are seeking to learn who visited a specific website designed to organize an Inauguration Day protest just this past January. Federal prosecutors issued a search warrant for the IP addresses of what could be up to 1.3 million people who visited the website disruptj20.org. But lawyers for the company that hosts the protest site say that this is pure prosecutorial overreach, and privacy advocates are saying this is entirely constitutional. So our justice correspondent Jessica Schneider has been digging on this for us. Chris is with us as well. Chris Gazarian, he is the general counsel for DreamHost, the site that provides the platform for Disrupt J20. So Jessica, let me just begin with you on some of our reporting, these IP addresses. It doesn't, from what I understand, it doesn't actually matter if you went to this protest or not. If you looked at the site, they want your information. And what information do they want?
Well, that's part of the problem here, Brooke. So the search warrant, it was signed by the U.S. Attorney, and it states that part of its aim is to get information on the people who organized, who participated in the riots on Inauguration Day, January 20th, right here in D.C. Protesters there, they were caught on video smashing storefronts and clashing with police. But really the problem is, and DreamHost, they've blogged about it and written about it in the legal filings, they say that the search warrant is asking for all of the information about everyone who visited that website, disruptj20.org. The search warrant, it asks for names, addresses, and even financial information like bank accounts and credit card numbers. So DreamHost right now, it's pushing back in its legal filings, and it's refusing to hand over that information. They say it would amount to about 1.3 million people, the details about all of them, Brooke, who may have just visited that website and maybe really had nothing to do with the actual protest. So that's the problem here.
So from the DreamHost perspective, Chris, you all are still pushing back. They want all this information. You guys are pushing back. What's happened? What are you telling them? Justice Department.
Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, the one thing that we did last Friday evening was file an opposition to the motion that the DOJ filed against us first. And so we're currently putting together arguments with our outside counsel and prepping for a hearing in D.C. on Friday to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Do you know, Chris, what prompted this judge to grant the search warrant in the first place?
We really don't know, Brooke, and we're trying to keep out of that position in terms of politics or why this happened. Our main concern now is to protect the users and the visitors of the website. We think it's a huge issue to have this many IP addresses, tens of thousands of people going out and finding a place with the DOJ for all of this stuff to be handed over because of a search warrant that's this broad.
So, Jessica, back over to you. DOJ wants all this information. What do they plan to do with it?
Well, so far we know that 200 people, they were indicted on felony rioting charges for those protests in downtown D.C. So presumably federal investigators, they want more information about those people who are being prosecuted, or potentially they want to go after more people who they have yet to prosecute. And the worry is that maybe they'll get some clues as to identities of people by going onto this website, disruptj20.org. But really, Brooke, free speech advocates, they say that the search warrant is just far too broad, and it could potentially chill people's right to speak out about their political views, because presumably many people went to this website just to voice their concerns or to see what was going on, and maybe they weren't involved in these protests.
Stay on it. Please, Jessica, let's follow up with you. And Chris, thank you so much. We'll see where this goes and in your fight to not release all this information. Coming up next, we'll talk to the friend of a man who was savagely beaten by neo-Nazis. Hi there, I'm Brooke Baldwin. Thank you so much for being with me on this Tuesday afternoon. After taking basically 72 hours to condemn racists by name, the President of the United States had a much quicker response in calling out some of the nation's top business leaders who have now parted ways with him. He just tweeted, quote, "For every CEO that drops out of the Manufacturing Council, I have many to take their place. Grandstanders should not have gone on jobs." And it looks like more and more, quote, grandstanders, just to borrow the president's phrase here, are choosing to sit out of the president's Manufacturing Council. We've just learned in just the last little while, this fourth executive announced his exit. Scott Paul is the head of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. He joins the heads of Merck, Under Armour, and Intel of bowing out. These executives are protesting the president's initial failure to call out these racists for who they are, who are responsible for the deadly violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. Scott Paul has now tweeted, quote, "I'm resigning from the Manufacturing Jobs Initiative because it's the right thing for me to do." So let's begin with Jim Acosta. Here's our CNN senior White House correspondent just outside of Trump Tower. And so, Jim, in addition to the executive news today, you have the president also retweeting conspiracy theorists. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, the president, Brooke, seems to be allowing Americans into his inner monologue today with all of these tweets. He's been on something of a tweet storm all day long. You mentioned the tweet that he posted earlier today, slamming those executives, those business leaders for quitting his Manufacturing Council. But yes, you're right. He also has retweeted in the last 24 hours a noted conspiracy theorist who is pushing the Pizzagate and Seth Rich conspiracy theories. That person who is a member of the alt-right, has espoused alt-right views, was essentially saying, why isn't the media paying more attention to these shootings in Chicago, the violence in Chicago? President retweeting that. Brooke, he also, I guess for a brief period, appeared to retweet an image of a train running over what appeared to be a CNN journalist. Now, we have heard from the White House on that, an anonymous White House official. Keep in mind, the president said in the past, don't believe anonymous sources coming out of the White House, but an anonymous White House official said that tweet was inadvertently posted and then later deleted. So we did hear from the White House in terms of one of the president's tweets today, but this has been going on for the last 12 or so hours, and it appears to be sort of the president kind of flailing around after some of the negative reviews he got yesterday after those remarks he made at the White House. I was there for those remarks when he tried to walk back his initial comments on the violence in Charlottesville from over the weekend.
Yep. And you were shouting those questions at him yesterday afternoon when he was saying, I've condemned it, I've condemned it. Staying on the president's tweets, Jim, just quickly, what's the latest on, he had retweeted this report about the potential of him pardoning, controversial Joe Arpaio out in Arizona?
Right. The Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio, he has been brought into court and essentially charged with being in contempt of court for violating a judge's order to stop rounding up immigrants, apparently for just racial reasons. And the president was asked by Fox News whether he's seriously considering a pardon. He apparently told Fox News that, yes, he is considering that. Fox and Friends put out a tweet to this effect earlier this morning. The president retweeted that. And then, oddly enough, the president appeared to retweet somebody who was calling him a fascist. That tweet was also retracted, and so it's just sort of time and again we're getting instance after instance over the last 12 to 24 hours of the president doing some rather strange things with his social media. And keep in mind, Brooke, you and I both know there have been several polls that have come out in the last couple of weeks where it has clearly demonstrated that a vast majority of Americans would like the president to stop tweeting as much. But of course, the president is demonstrating in the last day or so that he's going to keep doing what he's doing when it comes to his Twitter account.
Jim Acosta, thank you for now. Let's get back to this headline about these 4 executives, these 4 new defectors joining 3 other CEOs who have abandoned the president's business councils. Previously, it was over the president's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. Before that, it was President Trump's decision to ban refugees and immigrants from several Muslim-majority countries. So with me now, Richard Quest, CNN Money Editor-at-Large and CNN Business Correspondent, and Scott Jennings, former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush and a CNN political commentator. So good to see both of you. And just for people, just on understanding these manufacturing councils, where you have now 4 like that gone, you say this is an incredibly big deal because, well,
the president of the American Manufacturers Alliance has just resigned from a manufacturing council at the White House.
Not a good look. The White House.
Well, I mean, he's a manufacturing man, and he's gone.
So your point is that you alluded to maybe this is just a talking council, maybe not policy making, but you say it's a bad PR.
Sure. The PR is terrible, and it's the consequences of operationally messing up on Saturday. And I think the president's statement yesterday was right on, and so I'm glad they came back and got that right. I also think that if the president wants to get a CEO of something on the phone, he probably can. So as it relates to policy making, if he wants to talk to his CEO about, hey, we're thinking about doing this or that, he can talk to virtually anyone he wants to.
Do you think they'll really want to hop on the phone with him, given the fact that these 4 have left this manufacturing council?
I would be
the message this is sending.
Well, I would be surprised that if you were sitting at your office and the president calls, you wouldn't take the call. That would surprise me. If it's happening in private, if the president of the United States calls you, you're going to want to take it. I also think the White House would say, look, this council aside, what we want to talk about today is the positive economic activity in the United States. The Dow is up. Unemployment is down. We have job openings.
Before denouncing the racists.
So I think if you ask them, they would say, these councils and the machinations of the government aside, everything's going fine in the economy, and we deserve credit for that. So that's the positioning I think they will take to pivot out of what I think is a rough PR moment.
All presidents in some shape or form, all governments have these advisory councils.
Sure.
But the speed with which these were set up right at the beginning of the administration, with these massive photo opportunities in the White House, with blue ribbon CEOs round and about, more than you could throw a stick at. But what has these councils done? Well, the economic one, headed by Steve Schwarzman, it hasn't really met. And although they say they're doing backroom work with position papers, nobody really knows if this isn't just a way to gild the lily so that things look
But still,
good.
Richard, to your point, I mean, we've seen so many photo ops of these CEOs sitting around this big table with the president. This is significant. This is a businessman, now president, who seems to me proud of the economy, proud of the progress he feels like he's made, and so he wants to have these be flanked by CEOs. And when they continue to drop out, how is this not a blow to, if anything, his ego?
Well, he is a business person, and he clearly enjoys being surrounded by people from the private sector. I mean, look at the people he appointed to his cabinet. A lot of folks came in from the private sector. But again, I think as an operational matter, you really won't see much of a change on policy making here. Look, they're going to move forward on their core economic issue in the fall, which is tax reform. And this council was not going to affect their core issues on tax reform.
He's characterizing this on Twitter, calling them grandstanders. And not only that, but, you know, critics are saying, wait a second, Mr. President, you took 72 hours to denounce racists, and you take 51 minutes to denounce Ken Frazier, the one African-American CEO who is resigned.
And only the second African-American CEO in the S&P 500. So, you know, when Ken Frazier left, and he said, you know, that was a clear, strong message. Now you've got Under Armour, and you've got the American Alliance, and you've got Merck all leaving. And although they're not specifically saying we can't stomach what he did, the fact they've left, knowing the controversy, under the circumstances, leaves no doubt as to what that message is.
Scott and Richard, so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Next question, what happened inside Trump Tower this morning? This wave of retweets and deletes from President Trump, all of them fanning the flames involving his Charlottesville response. We'll delve deeper into that. Also, the vice mayor of Charlottesville raising eyebrows by simply referring to President Trump as 45. He refuses to call him the president. Hear why from him. And the Trump administration demanding the IP addresses of users who visited anti-Trump websites. Is this crossing the line, violating one's rights? Those details ahead. This is CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin.
Pick a card. We're also learning today that a former Trump campaign volunteer offered multiple times to set up meetings between campaign officials and the Russian President Vladimir Putin last March. I want to bring in our senior congressional reporter Maddow, who has been looking into this for us. So what do we know about the campaign person who made this offer, Maddow?
And this is George Papadopoulos, who is actually a foreign policy advisor, a campaign volunteer, and we're told from a source familiar with the matter that in March 2016, he sent a letter to several members, top members of the Trump campaign, with the subject line reading this, Wolf, meeting with Russian leadership, including Putin. Now, Papadopoulos, according to the Washington Post, tried at least 6 times to try to get meetings with top Trump officials and Russian officials during the course of the campaign. Now we understand that actually this was rejected by the Trump campaign. Number of officials raised concerns about having such a meeting, including Paul Manafort, the campaign chairman, the former campaign chairman, who of course is now subject of this investigation as well. Manafort believed that this would not look good for President Trump. They did not want to have this meeting, and so these requests, these efforts by George Papadopoulos did not move forward. Now, Papadopoulos has not responded to CNN's request for comment, did not respond to the Washington Post. So it's unclear exactly why he tried to seek these meetings, but we do know from intelligence officials that the Russians were trying to figure out entry points into the Trump campaign. This presumably could be one of them. Now, Wolf, this came also 3 months before that Trump Tower meeting in which Donald Trump Jr., Manafort, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, did attend with Russian operatives who had promised dirt to Donald Trump Jr. about the Clinton campaign. So there were other campaign contacts as well that committees on Capitol Hill are now going through, including roughly 20,000 emails detailing some contacts as well as discussion of Russian issues that the Senate Judiciary Committee is looking at, as well as Wolf, the Senate Judiciary Committee now calling on Jared Kushner, the White House, to give more information about Jared Kushner's security clearance form. They believe they have not gotten the responses they want about how he got this security clearance approved through the process without initially listing some of his foreign contacts. So if all this comes as investigators behind the scenes are going through a mountain of documents and trying to piece all this information together, Wolf.
Yeah, Jared Kushner, the president's senior advisor, also his son-in-law. Maddow, thank you very much, Maddow Raju, up on Capitol Hill. Let's bring in our panel to discuss these late-breaking developments. Jim Sciutto is our chief national security correspondent, and James Gagliano is a CNN law enforcement analyst, a former FBI supervising agent. What does this tell you about these efforts to establish some link between the campaign and high levels of the Russian government, including potentially Putin?
Well, remember, Trump administration, campaign, and now administration officials, their denials have been categorical for months, that there were any meetings won or any discussions of meetings with the Russians. That denial's already been belied by the fact that Donald Trump Jr. met in Trump Tower with Russians promising information on Hillary Clinton. We have that. This shows that there was further communication or suggestion of meetings. What's interesting about this, is, as Maddow noted there, is that this was rejected, at least this offer, which came before the meeting that did take place in Trump Tower.
This was an offer in March of 2016, and the meeting actually took place in June in Trump Tower.
And to be clear, this offer was to meet with the most senior Russian government officials, including Vladimir Putin. Whether this gentleman had the power to set that kind of a meeting up, we don't know. But it should be noted, they turned down, Manafort and others turned down this offer. But later, of course, they did accept an offer in Trump Tower between Donald Trump Jr. and Russians promising that damaging.
You know, James, we know that the special counsel, Robert Mueller, former FBI director himself, he's looking into these allegations, and they are right now only allegations, what's called collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
Wolf, I think where this took a turn for those who were attempting to suspend disbelief and say, a lot of smoke, but we just haven't seen any burning embers. When you go to the point of being able to get probable cause that gives you a search warrant, which is different, very different from getting subpoena from a grand jury, you have now indicated that there was some type of probable cause indicative of a crime, and where they went to search Paul Manafort's house, something involved potentially in that crime was there. I think that's where things turn for a lot of people, because for the special prosecutor who has immense powers, for him to go that route when he was already in negotiations with the Manafort camp about having those documents turned over, that says to me that they were concerned that some of those documents might be destroyed.
I want to get your quick reaction to Laura Jarrett's reporting that the Justice Department has been seeking the identities of all the individuals who went to this website organizing protests against President Trump on Inauguration Day. What do you think?
Well, it raises the question, what is the reason for that? Holding a protest against an American president in America under the First Amendment, there's nothing wrong with that. Why would the Department of Justice under Trump, under Attorney General Jeff Sessions, why would it consider that acceptable? Do they have evidence that crimes were committed or violence at some of these marches? It doesn't appear at this point, and that's why you have such a strong pushback from the group involved. It raises that question. What's the driving force behind this? And is there evidence of a crime, or is there an ulterior motive? Is it about finding the personal data of hundreds of thousands of people who oppose the president?
That would be inappropriate if that were the motivation, but you're a former FBI agent. What do you think?
Wolf, it's hard to say. I know that the president tweeted this morning again that, well, we've had this information for, 2 or 3 years now, at least since 2004. And yes, we know and we understand that groups like the Russians and the Chinese and Iran and North Korea are constantly trying to disrupt our electoral process. From what we know thus far, nothing in the actual machinations, the mechanisms of the machines have been altered. The spread of the disinformation is where we believe they were really trying to make a point of influencing the election. There's no doubt about that.
With that, where the courts decide, it's a very sensitive and important issue. James Gagliano, thanks very much. Jim Sciutto, thanks to you as well. Coming up, we have new 911 recordings right now detailing the troubled past of the man suspected of driving a car to a little while from now, we're going to hear supposedly from the president in that lobby. We'll have coverage of that right here on CNN. In the meantime, let's get some perspective on all these late-breaking developments. So we have CNN political analyst David Drucker. He's with us. He's a senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Our CNN political reporter and editor-at-large, Chris Cillizza, and CNN politics senior writer, Juana Summers. So, Juana, you wrote an important piece on CNN politics in which you said what the president didn't say in his statement was also significant. Tell us about that.
So in the piece, I talk about what the president did say, which was to decry racism as evil and to say that he does not stand behind the bigotry and hate and violence that we saw in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend. But something really critical that this president didn't say is that he does not want the support of members of the KKK, neo-Nazis, or white supremacists who back him. These are groups that have been emboldened since President Trump was elected in November. And we know this not just allegorically, it's because they've said so to us and reporters. Listen to what David Duke, the former KKK leader and Louisiana politician, said. He said, this is why we voted for Donald Trump. He says he wants to make America great again. Those are the goals we're working to. So I think that using the moral authority of his office and speaking forthrightly to the American people, he had an opportunity to say, I don't want these people behind me. If these are values you espouse, they have no place in my White House, no place in my campaign. And he didn't do that. And I think that a lot of people expected more from him. This is a president for whom everything is personal. He speaks very forthrightly at campaign rallies and at events. And that passion and that energy and that personal connection and the pushing away of those values just did not seem to exist in the statement that he gave on Monday.
Chris, he could fix that pretty quickly. He could tweet something along those lines when he comes out in an hour or two, whenever he's coming out over there at Trump Tower in New York City. He could say what Juana's saying she would have liked to have heard.
Yeah. To Juana's point, the problem here is the ambiguity. But both in the Saturday statement, more obviously ambiguous, the on many sides thing that clearly is not borne out by the facts. But on Monday, too, not a clear disassociation of, if you say you support me, I do not want your support, which is important to say because otherwise this will be taken, we already know is being taken as something, I hate to say this, something of a success for these folks. They got a lot of publicity. They're planning more of these rallies, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, he could do it, Wolf, and he could do it easily. You know, he always brags about how many Twitter followers he has, 34 or 35 million. He has sent out 3 tweets. I haven't looked since I've been on air, but 3 tweets about 2 yesterday about the Merck CEO, and then today, obviously, the one that you showed about these grandstanders who had quit. He has sent out, by my count, 0 tweets about Charlottesville. I always think that tweets matter because it speaks to what he really cares about, what he's really thinking. We've seen time and time again in this administration, the administration tries to do one thing, and Donald Trump says something that either somewhat or totally contradicts. This is who he is, his Twitter feed. It is the most obvious natural representation of him. So the fact that we have 0 on that and 3 on CEOs resigning from a manufacturing council essentially saying, losers will get more of you, I think it is telling.
It is telling, David, what he tweets and then what he retweets or shares others' thoughts with his followers, that's significant as well.
Well, it's what he values, right? So what Donald Trump talks about on Twitter versus the occasional teleprompter moment, there's a difference there. He values his Twitter communications. He has talked about how they're not going to take my social media away from me. And so I think that the trouble that Trump is running into here is he's being judged against the standard that he set. When he has something critical to say about somebody, nothing, no matter who they are, where in the world they're located, stops him from going on Twitter and being very specific in his critique or his condemnation. And so that's why it was so glaring here in that it took him a while to do this. And then when he finally did it, he responded a couple hours later, calling the media as the bad people for not being satisfied with his response. And the point isn't whether or not he has a point there. A lot of his voters, and a lot of voters in general, may believe that we're being a little bit tough on him. He finally came out and said what needed to be said. But it goes to how Trump chooses to operate. I'd say one more thing, and it gets to what Juana wrote about. In talking to some Republicans yesterday, and I was talking to John Fredericks, who hosts a radio show in Southern Virginia. He is a top Trump ally in Virginia, was a big supporter of his. I was asking him, look, how do Republicans need to handle this, where you have some Republicans, especially in the governor, senator, and Senate race in Virginia, that have had some different opinions on what happened in Charlottesville. And he said, look, I don't care if it costs us voters. Republicans need to be unequivocal in saying these people are not welcome. We specifically don't want their support. And even though he wasn't telling me that that's what he wants the president to do, that's clearly the message was that's what the president and every Republican leader needs to do, is specifically tell these kooks to get lost.
And I think, very quickly, I think what's hard, Dave touches on this. What's difficult is if you're a Republican elected official, let's say, and you look at Donald Trump more than willing on repeated occasions to call his own attorney general, more than willing on repeated occasions to call out Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, not willing to call out white supremacy, neo-Nazism, and hate groups.
Why is that, why do you think that is?
Asking me to try to read Donald Trump's mind is probably a really horrible idea, but I do think that it shows just where his values are, as David and Chris put it. These are not things that are top of mind for him. Some of the ways in which he uses Twitter, frankly, are to lash out at what he sees are political opponents. Doing some of the higher things, using the moral authority of the office. Donald Trump has not shown himself to be a president who has that same natural communicator role in those big moments of crisis and of concern in this country in a way that some of our past presidents on both sides of the aisle have done, particularly in his use of digital communication.
His inclination here was to treat this as a law and order issue. He was talking about restoring order, talking about all violence, and I'm with you. Like, I don't want to shrink the guy because I don't know what's going on in his head, but I think that he either understands and doesn't care, or doesn't understand that one of the roles that Americans of all stripes tend to expect from a president is the role of pastor, the role of moral leader beyond political leader. It's something that he didn't choose to embrace during the campaign, except in a few moments, and he hasn't chosen really to embrace as president.
Chris, what's happening with this chief strategist, Steve Bannon?
I mean, in any other White House, I would say, well, this is extraordinary, sort of being allowed to twist in the wind. But I feel like twisting in the wind is sort of the rule rather than the exception here. Had a number of people do this. Reince Priebus was twisting the wind for quite some time before he was let go. Jeff Sessions is still in the job, but is twisting in the wind. Look, I think Steve Bannon's getting it from a lot of sides. We heard the Rupert Murdoch, Anthony Scaramucci on the Colbert Report said he'd be gone if I had anything to do with it. Now, obviously, he doesn't have all that much to do with it, but don't think that Donald Trump doesn't pay attention. When Anthony Scaramucci, who, yes, he had to get rid of in the White House, but has been his friend for a very long time, when Anthony Scaramucci communicates via the media about Steve Bannon, Donald Trump pays attention. So, Steve, we've gone through, my only caveat, normally I would say, if you look at these tea leaves, you would suggest Steve Bannon is not long for this job, but he may not be, Wolf. But we've gone through this once before with Bannon, where it was he was fighting with Jared Kushner, and Trump stepped in and said, figure this out, and we all thought, well, you never win a fight with the family, and he kind of laid low and survived. I don't know how many times you can do that in a normal White House. The answer is 0 to 1. I don't know what it is in this White House, but if you're Steve Bannon, I mean, you can't be sleeping all that well in the evenings at this point.
See what happens. There could be developments. Who knows? Everybody stick around. David Drucker, Crystal Liza, Juana Summers, thanks very much. Coming up, why the Justice Department here in Washington now wants detailed information on more than 1 million people who visited a website organizing protests.
Politics is filled with characters and sometimes crooks. Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio fits both bills. The self-dubbed toughest sheriff in America faces time behind bars after being convicted of violating a court order and continuing conduct a judge ruled was patrols illegally targeting immigrants. Now Sheriff Joe has a big friend in the Oval Office, the president, who reportedly now is considering sparing the Arizona lawman from going to jail. Here it is. I am seriously considering a pardon for Sheriff Joe Arpaio. The president told Fox News he's a great American, and I hate to see what has happened to him. The president said a pardon could come, quote, right away, maybe early this week. Arpaio reacted with relief. But I'm happy he understands the case. I would accept the pardon because I am 100% not guilty, Sheriff Arpaio telling Fox News. This would be the first pardon of the Trump presidency if he means it and does it quickly. Is this a serious proposal that has been vetted through the Justice Department process that these things usually take? Or is this catnip to the base from the president?
Do you think I'm pretty sure it wasn't that. I think the latter would be my guess. I mean,
the other thing is he always, if you ask, are you considering X, he will almost always say he's considering it, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's something he's going to do.
Usually, I mean, there's a process for some of these things because you want to avoid pardoning someone who's going to end up,
or somebody
someone who's going to end up causing you some problems down the road. I think this is literally a pardon for that reason, like because it would help him politically with a certain segment of his base, and to hell with all the other people who are upset about it. It doesn't really matter. In fact, that's kind of the point. So who knows? But it's entirely possible that he's seriously considering. But no, I don't think that it's going through any sort of process.
And if you're unfamiliar with Sheriff Joe over the years, I visited him several times out at Maricopa County. He had an outdoor prison. He gives his inmates, most of them illegal immigrants, in his view anyway. Some people have challenged him, said no, he targets all Latinos, gives them pink underwear. Here's some highlights from Sheriff Joe over the years defending his behavior.
We want to monitor, to control my activities, my policies, and how I operate, including tents, pink underwear, and everything else. I'm the elected sheriff. I report directly to the people, not going to be subservient to the federal government when they have come up with no proof.
We are more concerned with the rights of illegal aliens and criminals than we are with protecting our own country. That must change.
That's Donald Trump's convention, the last fight. So you understand the affinity with the president between the two men. They agree on certain issues. The ACLU says this: if the president were to give Joe Arpaio a pardon, he would undo a conviction secured by his own career attorneys at the Justice Department. Make no mistake, this would be an official presidential endorsement of racism.
Well, and that's what Donald Trump likes about the idea, I'm certain, is the idea of poking the liberal establishment and the what he considers to be the kind of ACLU view of the world, and poking them in the eye. And that's what this would be. I mean, I think as we've said, like it probably doesn't have any substantive impact on policy. He's not the sheriff anymore, but the idea of making a statement probably appeals to Trump. The question is whether, as we've talked the entire show, whether the people around him who might think better of it can talk him out of it.
Well, and it does have a substantive impact on the idea of rule of law in this country. I mean, the president does have absolute power to pardon people, but this is a man who federal courts repeatedly told to do one thing, and he repeatedly defied them, and that's what he's been now convicted of, is refusing to follow the constitutional processes of the courts in this country. And by pardoning him, you're saying that that doesn't matter, that conviction doesn't matter as long as you're friends with Donald Trump.
Well, and he's ironically also an avatar of toughness and of rule of law and of straight talk about immigration. He's also a symbol of when that goes too far and becomes not lawful anymore.
Well,
so drive that wedge, baby.
And he lost his last election,
He lost his last election, which is important. We'll keep an eye on the president retweeting today a Fox News story about the president's interview with Fox News, saying he might do this. We'll keep an eye on it. Thanks for joining us in Inside Politics. See you back here this time tomorrow. Wolf Blitzer takes over after a quick break.
This is a story.
Welcome back. It is Chief Strategist Stephen Bannon's turn to take center stage in the latest installment of Real Staff Wars, Trump White House edition. And as more and more Trump insiders say Bannon's days may be numbered, his allies at his old company, Breitbart, are making clear how they see this latest, very public West Wing power struggle. Take a look. Report: Murdoch and White House Dems urging POTUS to dump Bannon, give Trump voters middle finger. That headline references New York Times reporting that Fox chief Rupert Murdoch is among those recommending to the president that Bannon be shown the door. The Dems reference, of course, to presidential son-in-law Jared Kushner and his Manhattan White House allies. Now, we've known for some time Kushner and Bannon are at odds. And Breitbart and many other conservatives view Team Kushner, which includes, of course, the president's daughter Ivanka, as liberals bent on tossing away the 2016 Trump campaign agenda on immigration and other issues. Plus, as this drama continues, we were reminded last night, the former White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci wishes he was on the job long enough, a week, to get Bannon canned.
Steve Bannon, a white supremacist.
I don't think he's a white supremacist, although I've never asked him if he's a white supremacist. What I don't like, though, is the toleration of it. It's something that should be completely and totally intolerated. And so, so for me...
Not sure that's a word, intolerated, but CNN senior White House correspondent Jeff Zeleny is outside the Trump Tower where the president is. Jeff, a lot of advisors there with the president. There's a big event this afternoon. Is Steve Bannon among them?
John, good afternoon. Steve Bannon, the White House chief strategist, is not here in Trump Tower. Of course, he spent so much time last year, the end of the fall campaign,